Hello and welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with me today. I'm so glad that you are here. Before we dive in, a quick reminder, if you enjoy the episode or even just the show, please share it with your colleague or friend in the industry. These conversations are really just all about expanding women's health education and especially exercise physiology as an industry. And the more people that we reach, the bigger the impact that we can make together. So please, if you don't mind, I'd really appreciate the share. Now, before we get stuck into the episode, I would love to give you a little update in the background, what's happening for me. At the time of recording this, Tanisha and I are working very hard behind the scenes on Ways, the virtual summit. If you don't know what that is, you are a little bit behind, but that is okay. We actually shared an episode with you last week about all the nitty-gritty details of the event. And we are very, very excited about this event, and I hope that you are too. I am actually in a pretty big work grind with both her education and her exercise physiology, and I'm actually loving it. There have been times where I have been in work grinds before, and things just don't really feel like they're going in the direction that I really want them to, or things aren't coming to fruition. But this time it feels really different, which I'm quite surprised about. And I'm also really, really excited to see where both her education and her exercise physiology go in the next 12 months and what it looks like this time next year. So stay tuned for that. Personally, though, outside of work, I am definitely not doing a whole lot because I'm in the work grind. But besides from the usual activities that you do in life when you're in your mid 30s, like groceries and house maintenance and walking the dogs and going to the gym and the stuff that I feel like I thought was so boring when I was younger is now actually just like the normal and quite satisfying. But I'm definitely not doing a lot of the things that I could be doing for personal fun, shall we say, which is so fine. Once I'm out of this work grind, I am definitely going to be picking up a couple of my hobbies and I'm doing a lot more fun things and having a little bit more work-life balance. But the current season for me is business building. And I am actually so okay with that for like the first time. Well, not the first time because I love doing it, but for a while, like I'm like super excited about this one. I don't feel like the fatigue and the hard work is like grinding me down to my bone, if you get my drift. Um, but I would actually probably like to do an episode on work-life balance, but I will add that to the list, so stay tuned for that one. But yeah, that is like pretty much what's going on for me. Nothing really, nothing really like extra to report on than you probably already know. But anyway, I want to get in stuck into the topic of today, the broadness of women's health. Now, when I first moved into women's health, I thought that this was my niche. And to be really honest, I also thought that women's health was actually just pelvic floor and mostly around pre and postnatal health. It was like, I do women's health, I do pelvic floor and pre and postnatal care. Well, that's what also people thought when I told them. So, like clients or friends, when they're like, hey, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I'm in women's health. Oh, you do like pre and postnatal care and pelvic floor. Like, yeah, that's me. And that's what I actually thought women's health was. And I know that maybe not now, but I know that that has been the case for quite a few clinicians. And if you also have felt like that, you are not alone. And I think this is slowly changing now, and women's health is gaining more awareness away from just like pelvic floor and pre and postnatal health. But the truth is that women's health is 50% of the population. Well, I don't know whether it's 50%, but half the population. It spans every single stage of life, every body system, and even health conditions. So if you still think that women's health is a niche, or your brain instantly jumps to pre and postnatal care or pelvic floor health, like mine did, you're actually missing enormous opportunities to grow as a clinician and to impact the lives of clients. So today, I really want to challenge that mindset. I want you to move away from thinking of women's health as a specialty, like a tiny specialty or a niche, and instead see it for what it really is, a broad field with massive scope and the space for really deep expertise. Because women's health isn't narrow. It's layered, it's complex, and every time you choose a focus area, it doesn't actually exclude you from others, which I think is also something that a lot of people think. It actually adds another layer of value to your skill set. Now, I've got a couple of key things that I really want to cover. So, let's just talk about it first from the perspective that women's health is not a box. It's more of like a field or an area of interest, shall we say. And within that field, there are so many different directions that you can take. So let's talk about a few of the most common areas in women's health and the kinds of skill set you actually develop when you go deeper into each one of these areas. So let's start with pelvic health. That's my jam. I would almost say pelvic health is my niche within women's health, if that makes sense. But if you focus on pelvic health, you are not just going to be teaching pelvic floor exercises, you're developing really strong musculoskeletal assessment skills, rehabbing and restoring muscle function using things like corrective exercise programming and progressive overload. You're learning sensitive communication and even things like body literacy education for your clients. Very much that is also quite a lot of layers of skill just within that area itself. Now, when you work in specific health conditions, maybe something like endometriosis and pelvic pain, you will build the skill set and the expertise in chronic pain science, nervous system regulation. You're going to understand how different body systems are impacted. And a really big component of these conditions is actual collaboration in multidisciplinary teams. And if you're someone who doesn't really reach out to other clinicians and collaborate with this care, I highly encourage you to start doing that because it builds such great foundations for you to have a network, but also for you to really truly support your client and have really cohesive care. Now, if you are passionate maybe more about the perimenopause and the menopause space, your skill set here shifts towards, I think, more like long-term health planning and management. So we're thinking about bone health, we're looking into metabolic changes, cardiovascular health, and strength-based programming, mostly for prevention and resilience, and symptom management too. There is a huge component of symptom management in this phase that I think a lot of us aren't really aware until you start diving into the physiology behind menopause. You're also going to be developing a very good understanding about mental health challenges that show up during this stage and how to support women who are struggling with the transition and the identity shifts that come with it. This is something I feel like you get experience from by diving into that population and really helping that particular clients and maybe promoting it. Because if you haven't been through menopause, and I have obviously not, then you don't get it. And that is something that I really hear a lot in that population is you really have to learn to listen to these clients and understand how they're feeling and be really empathetic towards this and accommodating in your programming. Because if we don't go through it and we don't understand it, there is that, I guess, layer of a little bit of disconnect from the person because they're like, you don't even get it. I actually used to feel this about pre and postnatal care when women would say, you don't have children. Like, why do you care about this so much? Or you don't really get it. And I find it so interesting because if you had a health condition, you would see an EP, say, I don't know, let's talk about it from like, I don't know, diabetes. Let's say diabetes. They would say like, they're not going to say to the EP in front of them, like, you don't have diabetes, you don't get it. Maybe they do. I don't know. But I just feel like with women's health, sometimes those phases and the changes in life stages, people tend to be like, you just don't get it because you haven't been through it. But if you see this more, you dive into it, you understand the physiology, you really listen to your clients well and develop all of those skills really, really deeply, you will start to understand this a little bit better. Not from a personal perspective, but just from a, I guess, experience perspective. Now, if you're working in maybe the fertility and pregnancy postnatal area, this is also huge in itself. Each one of those has its own gap, I think, or area. So you're going to be thinking about like expanding your knowledge and skill set into menstrual cycle knowledge, hormonal dysregulation, maybe even conditions like PCOS or hypothalamic amenorrhea. You're going to be prescribing exercise safely during complex changing physiological states. This is also going to include understanding potentially around fertility treatments and how exercise interacts with them. as well as considering the impacts of movement, not only on pregnant women, but also on the baby and the developing fetus, depending on what you like to call them. Uh, You'll also need to navigate pregnancy complications like gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, placenta previa. Knowing how these conditions affect exercise, prescription choices, and overall health outcomes for both the mother and the baby will also be relevant. Now, on top of that, pregnancy also brings about musculoskeletal changes. So you're going to need to know about pelvic girdle pain, low back pain, carpal tunnel. They're all going to impact daily function and the way that you prescribe exercise. And then we look at the postnatal period, which is, a field in itself. Here, you're supporting women through recovery from birth, whether that's a vaginal delivery or a cesarean delivery. You're going to be addressing pelvic floor or abdominal wall dysfunction, managing fatigue, mental health challenges at this point, because there's a huge mental shift for these women, helping women progressively rebuild strength and confidence in their body. And you're also going to have to consider the life that comes alongside being a mum. So feeding, sleep disruption, return to work, nutrition, actually eating enough, the reality of caring for a newborn, all of which are going to influence exercise prescription and functional outcomes, adherence to programs hugely. So that is also a big topic. Now, maybe you'd also like to focus on female specific oncology. This might be breast cancer, ovarian cancer, gynae cancers. You're building skill sets here in safe and effective exercise prescription during and after treatment, or even being able to consider your exercise programming in a woman who has previously had this in their history. Now, that's going to include understanding all the impacts around symptoms like fatigue, lymphedema, early menopause. We're supporting long-term health outcomes. You need to understand the impacts of surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, all the different types of treatments. You're also going to gain so much experience in communication and working really closely with multidisciplinary teams. This is such a unique space in itself with what the person's going through, and we can provide so much support for these women. And then I think we can kind of finish off the women's health areas with the mental health side. These don't sit separately from the rest. Mental health conditions are going to weave into all of the above areas. Building skills here means that you're going to learn to bridge the gap between physical and psychological health and understanding how mental health layers into every phase of women's health. And here is where the complexity actually comes in. Women's health isn't just really broad and has areas that you could almost then call niches, but it's layered. A woman might be perimenopausal, but also managing endometriosis. She might be a postnatal woman with pelvic floor dysfunction, whilst also living with an autoimmune condition or has a mental health challenge. When you start layering life phases with health conditions, women's health becomes incredibly complex. And that's exactly why skill layering is so important. If you only see women's health through one lens, that's narrow, you'll miss the interconnected picture of what it actually is. But when you build expertise across the different areas, you actually become the clinician who can hold space for that complexity and guide someone through it. And here's the part that I think is often overlooked. It's not just about having the knowledge in all of these areas, but it's about knowing how to consider every layer together when you design a program. It's about prescribing for the very person in front of you, not just for their pelvic floor issues and symptoms, not just for endometriosis, not just for menopause, but for the whole human with all of those layers at once. This is the gap that I see so many clinicians are missing. And honestly, this is what makes us as exercise physiologists really stand out as exceptional healthcare providers. It's how we show other health professionals just how vital that we actually are in clients' healthcare plans, and truly understanding the person in front of us and the layers of complexity within them. And I think it's also what makes us so different, and being able to describe how different we actually are from a physiotherapist or a personal trainer, which is kind of where we get shoved when people don't know what we do. We have the ability to deal with complexity. We can look at all the conflicting phases, the conditions and symptoms, and still create a path forward for that person in front of us and support someone's function, their health, and their quality of life. And that's where the real value of women's healthcare actually lies. The power of skill layering is something that I have already spoken about before in a previous episode. And if you haven't listened to that one, I'd highly suggest you search back. I think it's maybe 2 or 3 back episodes from this one. But I really want to touch on it again from a personal perspective and show you what this looks like in a sense of how I've built my pathway. Choosing a direction in women's health doesn't close off the doors, which is what people said to me when I was saying, I just want to do women's health. I actually remember someone saying, you're just going to cut off 50% of potential clients, which is, I mean, I guess it was because I was saying no to males, but it's not really about that. It actually adds depth when we think about women's health and doing all the different things. My own journey actually started with pelvic floor rehab post-birth, which is what I thought women's health actually was. And then it moved more into pelvic floor function for the active woman. So I was doing much more with like training, CrossFit, powerlifting, just general everyday exercise that people were having a lot of pelvic floor symptoms in. This ended up going down the pathway of pelvic floor tension-based clients because I found that that was actually the most common client that I would see. And this has now led me down further into endometriosis and pelvic pain. And that has now also brought in, or I've had to research and learn a lot more about the fertility health side of care and preconception planning, because the clients that I usually see with endometriosis or pelvic pain are usually trying to have a baby, and sometimes this is where they actually find their diagnosis. So once I've seen them through preconception care, I'm then moving them through pregnancy and the postnatal period, potentially building strength back up in preparation for another pregnancy. So each skill that I have developed while focusing kind of like on one area has layered into the next one. And together, all of those skills have made my practice so much stronger. Think about it like a Musk EP who develops knowledge in fertility health. They don't stop being a Musk EP. They just bring a really unique new value to their existing client base and can potentially support newer clients that are coming in that might be coming for fertility health, but also have Musk problems. That's what makes clinicians irreplaceable. You become the person people turn to for the complex interconnected cases. Also makes you unique to every other clinician. You may be in women's health, someone else may be in women's health, but you're still so different. And this mindset shift really matters for your career growth because women's health has breadth. There's no single path that you have to follow. You can align your learning with your own passions and your own interests, and maybe even what a lot of clients are coming in to see you for. That's what creates career longevity. You'll never run out of a new area to explore, and you'll never need to stop. You'll step outside of women's health to keep evolving. You may decide you want to do that, but you don't have to. There's still so much to do. I see this every day in students coming through her education programs. They're all in women's health, but each one of them looks so different from the other, and that's the beauty of it. There is so much diversity even in women's health. This is also why collaboration is such a big part of her education. Like, I call myself a women's health EP, but there are plenty of areas within women's health that I don't really know enough about to really teach confidently in the amount of depth that I want to be able to deliver to people. That's why I built the collaborative programs within her education so that clinicians with deep expertise in one area can share their knowledge with others and help them layer their skills so well that they can truly support the complexity that actually comes in the door for women's health. And the same principle has applied when we shaped Ways. We wanted presenters who were really good at the thing that they were doing, and they could layer on the components, and then as a whole event, it would create these different skill sets that we could pull together in practice within the next week. That's where the gold is, and that's what we need more of in the industry. So here's what I really want you to reflect on after this episode. And I want you to ask yourself, what direction in women's health feels exciting to me right now? And how could building expertise in that area or in areas that are connected to it add new layers to my practice? Because every new layer doesn't just expand your knowledge, it expands your value, your impact, and your ability to support women through the real world complexity of their own health. Women's health is broad, it's evolving, and the best part is that you get to decide how you move through it. Every direction you choose adds to your skills, your impact, and your career longevity. If you really want to see this in practice and you haven't already, I would recommend coming to Ways. It's full of clinicians who have built layers in their career, and they'll be sharing their knowledge with you, not just their expertise, but also show you the possibilities of your own career growth. Thanks for tuning in today. Don't forget to share this episode with a colleague who would benefit. And I'll see you in the next one for another conversation that will challenge your thinking and expand your scope in women's health. See you in the next one. Bye.